Ben Woolvin reporting, and we are joined by Dr. Molly Scott-Cato of the Green Party to discuss this. Welcome to the programme. Molly, you're suggesting that money should now be diverted from the government's £50 billion HS2 project to be spent instead on the South West. Is that right?
That's right. The Green Party's always opposed HS2, which we see as a vanity project, and we've always said that that money should be invested in regional railways. And actually, I think what people in the South West are asking is how is it that these MPs who've been representing this part of the world for the past so many years have actually not brought that investment forward. If you look at the IPPR figures, you see that 100 times as much money is spent on transport in the capital as it is in the southwest, and I think people in the southwest are just saying that they haven't been looked after properly, and it was quite clear this was going to happen if the railways were not improved, and it's no good coming forward now after the disaster and offering money. It should have been done before.
Gary, you haven't lobbied hard enough. You should have been lobbying harder before.
You know, maybe there's some truth in that. It's been a core destination for many of us to actually see our railway line upgraded over the years, but of course getting that kind of very heavy investment hasn't been easy. But sometimes it takes a crisis for London to wake up. I think the government have now recognised we have a real issue here. The local councils, Devon, Cornwall, Plymouth, coming together, speaking with one voice, members of Parliament speaking with one voice. We've now got to make sure it happens in the next few years.
There does seem to have been a lot of shock, but we saw images there of waves smashing into the side of trains with passengers on board. If you're sitting on that train with waves hitting you against the glass, it's not come as a surprise to passengers, really, has it? And those passengers who've been on bus replacement services for the last couple of winters.
Well, the bus replacement has largely been about Cowley Bridge and the flooding east of Exeter, which Ben is more equipped to talk about than I am.
But indeed, there should be investment right the way down the line, rather than 50 billion going up north.
Government have said two things. One, we're going to get this problem sorted out as quickly as possible. Secondly, there will be a proper review into other options, and I certainly favour looking at an inland option, maybe from Newton Abbot to Exeter, and dealing with this issue once and for all.
OK, Ben, you've been in favour of HS2 in the past. You've always been in favour. Would you now be prepared to vote against the HS2 hybrid bill coming up in the spring if it meant that you could negotiate on terms for the rail link in the South West?
Well, I think we should use the HS2 investment as a negotiating tactic, if you like, with the government to make sure we get what we need down here. I don't think it needs to be an either or. I mean, I said to David Cameron at Prime Minister's Questions this week, as a country, we're going to have to invest a lot more in our infrastructure because of climate change, and he agreed with me. But given the tiny fraction of expenditure that we would need to address the problem that Gary's just identified at Dawlish compared with HS2, it's quite clear to me that the priority needs to be here and now rather than the HS2 programme, which is decades ahead, let's face it.
Molly, Ben says it doesn't need to be either or. You can actually have both. Would you agree?
Suddenly, now there's a crisis, there seems to be money available, which I find rather surprising when we've been hearing that there's no money available. And I'm not really very impressed by this way that we wait for a crisis before we act, because what we know about climate change is there will be more unpredictability and more crises. And I think we've also lost confidence in the government, and particularly in the Environment Secretary, who doesn't appear to deal with climate change. And how can we think that somebody who doesn't think climate change is actually happening can manage this kind of issue? And that, I'm afraid, is going right across government.
Gary, you can't have a climate change sceptic at the head of your Environment Agency in a time when you've got extreme weather conditions.
It doesn't matter whether a person thinks this is being caused by man or not. We all recognise that our climate is changing, and it's bringing to our door more and more extreme weather events that we've got to adapt to, and we all recognise that, and I agree with Ben. We now need to see greater investment into our railway line. It's got to be made more resilient against flooding, and I think he's right. We can use this as leverage against the debate to come on HS2 and say we won't support HS2 if we don't get our fair share of
Let's look at these specific options then. Gary has said that he'd like to see the line rerouted. Ben, what would your preferred option be?
The top priority has to be to get the existing line reopened as quickly as possible, but I think in the long run we have to have a line which is less vulnerable to the impacts of climate change. What that is, I think we should wait for the experts to come up with this review that the government has announced. All I would say is that this idea
I'll stop you there, because waiting for reviews has actually caused some anger in the South West.
No, but it needs to be quick. I mean, they need to get on with this, and it needs to be done quickly. But going around, I'm afraid, going around Dartmoor to the North Fire Oak Hampton is not, in my view, the answer, because it misses out all the main population centres of South Devon, Torbay, Newton Abbot and so on.
Do you agree with your colleague Lord Berkeley that birds have been put before humans here in this case?
Well, the details around that decision don't appear to be quite clear to me, but clearly the Environment Agency has statutory responsibilities when it comes to conservation of wildlife and species like that, but of course we have to get our priorities right.
Molly, we have to get our priorities right. It's difficult for the Green Party here, isn't it? Because actually, yes, repair work in Dawlish may have been delayed because we were looking at the impact on birds, and yet you want immediate repairs. How does your party balance both those positions?
Well, I think we have to learn to undertake that balance better, really. And so I know a lot of the emphasis here is on business and getting the South West open for business, but a lot of the business we've got in the South West is actually tourism. And I hope when we look at the review of these lines, we're going to be actually thinking about the quality of life for the people who live in the South West, and also we're going to be thinking about tourism and the beautiful part of the world that it is.
Should the line at Dawlish, because it's so beautiful, be preserved even at the consequence of the bird population?
I mean, I'm afraid I'm quite romantically attached to that bit of railway, as I think many people are who travel along it and who live in the South West. So I think I agree with Ben that we should preserve that, but I also think the Oakhampton option is important because that could then open access to Dartmoor for tourists.
Gary, Patrick McLaughlin announced a doubling of Flybe flights down here. Welcome news for the future, but do you think this is all going to be enough now? Finally, we seem to be looking at the South West and people are realising, yeah, the connections have not been good, the money has not been spent in this area.
I think what I'm encouraged by is that everyone is doing all they can. So Flybe are putting on more flights from Newquay to Gatwick. We're seeing First Great Western respond to a little bit of public pressure and reducing their prices. Network Rail.
But only because they had put them up.
I agree.
Which was shocking.
That was a poor mistake, but they've got it right now. Network Rail are keeping us all informed, and they have responded very urgently. So I think everyone is doing all they can to get this line reopened, and then we will look at the longer-term solutions and make sure that the far southwest is connected to the rest of the country.
Ben, could Labour have done more? You had 14 years, and so far we just kept patching up our railways, didn't we?
Oh, no. We had a major investment. If you remember, after the Hatfield crash, we had to spend billions of pounds on improved signalling, lineage, and so forth.
So why are we in this position now,
well,
then?
I'm afraid, even with the promises made this week, which we've yet to see delivered, capital spending on infrastructure investment is lower under this government, as is spending on flood defence, and until we have a government that's committed both to those investments and recognises climate change as the threat it is, I'm afraid I won't believe the promises that have been made, because what those made in the past have not been delivered.
So people should vote Green then, should they?
I don't think some of the Greens' ideas are realistic. I mean, I think some of their ideas, and I would say I was a very green tinge. Well, you've advocated in your press release today opening up all of these lines, including the Team Valley line. I simply do not think that is going to be a cost-effective
solution. If we weren't spending the money on
solution.
HS2 and we weren't spending money on Trident, there would be plenty of money for all of those railway lines. And that's what we think. That's better in terms of quality of life for people in the South West.
I have a great deal of time for some of the Greens' ideas and suggestions, and like you, I think it's untenable to have a Secretary of State for the Environment who's a climate change denier, but I'm afraid to say that sometimes the Greens' policies are not totally realistic.
And I have to stop you there because it is time to move on. Thank you very much for joining us.